So, we managed to make it through another Overwatch regular season with little to no problem. Well, mostly. Let's take a look at how the competition did. You came into this year as the clear-cut number 20, and, well, you didn't disappoint? Congratulations? This was one of the most pathetic displays of professional Overwatch ever witnessed. The incompetence is enough to even make the 0-40 Dragons laugh into tears. To sum it up, your initial roster lost to Sumito in a 2-week-old Valiant team. You had one of the worst tanks and flex DPS in league history. Your general manager was forced to play support for a game. And you had the 3rd winless season in Overwatch League history. And even with all of this in mind, it wasn't until halfway through this year that the bells went off in your head that something had to change. The environment over there was purely toxic, the management was incompetent, and a good number of players just weren't any good. The players in general deserved a lot better. It's unfortunate they had to be a part of this, but the org? Yeah, no. You deserve all of this heat. A lack of effort in a horrible environment fabricated by lies deserves to be punished. Congrats on one of the worst years ever. Out of my sight, man. Disgusting. You know, for someone who was supposed to suck, I'm left feeling oddly pleased. A team created literally weeks before the season, with no management, no resources, and a lackluster roster somehow was not last. Not gonna lie, Valiant deserved to suck because Immortals are terrible owners, but damn, you gotta respect the Valiant's hustle. They actually showed life, and a desire to improve, unlike another bad team we know. The fact that they managed to be entertaining a couple of times this year is a pleasant surprise. Reverse sweep victories, the best Battle of LA in years, likable personalities? For a team set up for failure, you gotta respect it. Genuinely the most likable Valiant team in years. Well done, boys.
Defeat.
I'd say this year went about as expected. You came in as the bottom team in your region, and that's where you finished. Let's be honest, they were kind of doomed from the start. The moment that they announced that Fleta was on tank, we all knew that all hell was about to come loose. Whenever a god roster isn't just gifted to him, Coach Moon's brain literally turns to mush. Fleta on tank, originally DM on flex support, I mean even Gundam Jin on main support jail. Vintage Coach Moon at his finest. The Dragons couldn't even beat contenders teams this year. The obvious problems in the preseason never got any better. The lone bright spot was Hisu and Viper. Viper in particular had quietly one of the better rookie seasons, but nobody's going to bother acknowledging it because Shanghai were terrible. Watching him and Hisu carry to no avail all year was pain and agony. The wheel of Shanghai has officially gone full circle. From 0 to hero, and now back to 0.
Oh no! We suck again!
Things weren't supposed to be this way. You were supposed to be on the up. You finally had a core that worked. You even got off to a hot start. You looked like you could be the best team in the East for a while. But the moment that things went wrong, it all came crashing down. Once teams realized that the Charge can't play any Sombra, and that Choi is their only consistent playmaker, their season was essentially over. They never bothered to adjust, and teams simply caught up to them. They lose one game to Dreamers, and suddenly they're insta-boomed and they can't even win in scrims. They start blaming Piggy for his mistakes. Suddenly Choi is a toxic player, and now the Charge all of a sudden don't want to invest in the league anymore. So they turn a super likable team that still reasonably had a chance into the Chengdu retirement home. One of the worst mid-season collapses I have ever seen. And yet again, the Charge add yet another irrelevant season to their ever-growing collection. What a disgrace.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Why am I talking about you this early? Aren't you supposed to be the franchise that's consistently in the running? How did you not even make the play-ins? You lost a couple of valuable players during the offseason, yes, but this is downright absurd. It's not like they weren't boasting any talent. Things started off pretty good. A 5-3 record and a damn near trip to Korea is as good as it gets. You pretty much had a play-in spot in the palm of your hand. Just make a few improvements here and there, and win a couple games, and you're golden. Their response to this? Losing 7 of their last 8 games, getting reverse swept by the Valiant of all teams, blaming Dante for a bunch of their problems, and a complete and utter meltdown at support. Dear God, that's an implosion for the ages. By far, one of the worst mid-season collapses that we'll ever see. They risked it all on a new tank mid-season while failing to address the other major problems. Let's not beat around the bush. Tank was an issue, but far from the only thing. They were complete and utter garbage on Sombra comms, and generally, the lack of production from Kai and Yaki really hurt them in the long run. It felt like the coaching went after all of the wrong problems, and eventually it led to Lastro also wanting to step away. Everything that could have went wrong absolutely did. A team with Kevster on it couldn't even make the play-ins. That is embarrassing. And the worst part of all, this is in all likelihood the end of the Gladiators. Regardless of OWL's future status, Gladiators ownership straight up is bailing out of esports. Gladiators by all rights are a dead franchise, and this is going to be their final legacy on the league. Their worst season ever. Ouch.
You did good, kid.
All things considered, you did alright. Your season wasn't one to brag about, but the bar was also pretty low. A roster with a lot of questions ended up being halfway decent. They had their fair share of brilliant moments and competitive performances. Mirror ended up being a reliable starter in his redemption arc on tank, and Flora had a major bounce back year. And who could forget about the star of the show? alexyOWL. He made the Justice worth watching every single day as a borderline MVP candidate. Watching alexyOWL emerge from Shy Shadow and be the true superstar carry of a team was magnificent, and through his efforts, the Justice made mid-season knockouts and the play-ins for some bonus points. For a team with rather low ceilings overall, that's a good result. They worked hard, they stayed competitive, and were enjoyable to watch. That's a lot more than a lot of other teams can say, so good on you, boys. Not the most ideal way to potentially end your legacy. You're not really living up to the name, but we can't say the expectations were all that high this year. The downfall of APAC led to a complete roster overhaul, and the dynasty simply could not recover. You had ups, and you had downs, and even a flash of hope for the play-ins, but there was never much of a chance for you. Half the year was Profit carrying a sorry team to no avail. The other half was subsequent roster changes that they nearly regretted. There wasn't much to look forward to as a Dynasty fan. Consistent tank issues, Sombra gaps, support issues, and just a general lack of life. And as the realization starts to set in, I can't help but think about Profit and Void. This could be their final year as pros before moving to the military. Two of the most legendary players to ever grace the game don't even get a shot at the playoffs, and were pretty much an afterthought this year. Profit in particular still did very well, but it's obvious that both their best days are well behind them. What a sad day. They could have done more. They could have been more. When I think about how the Dynasty played this year, all I feel is sadness. Coming to this realization that things could be over for players we've been watching since Apex brings a special kind of pain. What a way to potentially go out. No roar, no fight, no nothing. Just a sad whimper. I'm gonna go cry in a corner, man.
Are you winning, son?
I gotta say, the NYXL had a pretty respectable year. Is their record maybe a little inflated? Yeah, I'd say so. However, 7-9 is still way better than I ever could have expected. Before the season even began, New York were apparently total crap in scrims. They had drama attached to their names by trying to force a full marginalized gender team that just wouldn't work, and after that they were still really bad. But once the season began, it was a different story. A couple solid wins, a mid-season knockout, and play-in appearance. Not too shabby for a team that was supposed to be bottom 3 NA, and you gotta give it up to the players. Not many people believed in those guys. The Fits couldn't play in the West, and the Kellen and Psycho are bad narratives fell flat on their faces. With little resources, this entire team showed some excellent fight. As much crap as I give Changun for his questionable choices throughout the years, he earned some massive respect as a coach this year. He got that entire team producing to the max. We knew for a fact that they were never going to go anywhere, but it's still the best year New York's produced in arguably 3 years. Given the pain and the hardships the fan base has gone through recently, that's a massive W in my book.
No! No! Please, no! No! No!
So, that happened. Perhaps one of the most hyped up young rosters in league history didn't even make the playoffs. Huh. I'm angry about this, yes, but more so confused. Confused on how such a blunder is even possible. A team with Proper and all of his O2 Blast buddies were 500 on the year. This was supposed to be a team with a loaded DPS line, versatile tanks, and a promising backline, but they were nothing short of depression. Every little thing that possibly could have gone wrong pretty much did. Vindame and Finn, they were awful. Heesang could not play Sombra, and the Shock in general just could not get it together. And thanks to their crazy expectations, massive panic ensued not long after their bad start. I'm talking support and DPS overhauls, and even asking the scriptwriters to give them an easier schedule. The whole 9 yards. And guess what? Nothing changed. Deep down, they were still the same irrelevant Shock team from the beginning of the year. Lots of underperformance issues, and a lack of comfort on certain positions, plus the coaching not doing anything to save this. A team that was supposed to be competing for a championship pretty much had no feats to their names, and they completely whiffed on the playoffs. I mean, bruh, you weren't even a match for the decent teams this year. What the hell happened? You're the San Francisco Shock. Their time in the sun was bound to end eventually, but to not even make the playoffs? With the reigning MVP of the league? That's embarrassing. But then again, that's the gamble you take with a young roster. Contenders is obviously a lot different from the big leagues. Even if it seems like everything's written in stone, with the crazy potential and all the sexy names, you don't know what you're getting for sure. Cries in preseason power rankings. And cause of their disappointing year, this might have been the last time we ever see Proper. This man is so used to winning that this year boomed him and his motivation. That's right. The Shock failed so hard that one of the best players to ever grace the game is contemplating retirement. The Shock committed quite a few atrocities this year, but this might be the worst of all. 2023 was nothing short of a tease. One of the most disappointing seasons in league history, if not the most disappointing. Yikes. Okay, let's see, who's next on the list? Justice, check. Shock, check. Ah, yes. Toronto Defiant. I don't think I'm qualified for this one, but luckily for me, I think I know someone who is.
We took the most hyped team in Western Overwatch history, gave them a year of OWL experience, and then slapped them back together on a team with hopes of a dominant showing that rivals British colonization. Unfortunately, we also put this team on the Toronto Defiant, so even if they had peak LeBron, Faker, Wayne Gretzky, Bob Ross, or whoever else is a great at their sport, they were destined for perfect mediocrity. It also didn't help that the team was a complete dumpster fire, no Tracer player, no synergy, and no results. Speedly will go down as one of the biggest flops the league has ever seen, and OG will go down as one of the best spawn room interior designers to ever do it. You simply have to admire his dedication to being in there as much as physically possible. But the evil deeds do not stop, because then they decided to give the fans the worst thing possible: hope. They broke up the American Tornado core, brought in a Rookie of the Year contender in Spectra, and started to look like a real team. Suddenly, the meta is shifting in their favor, with rumors saying they are top dogs. And despite all the doomer posts about the Ilyari nerfs, they come out and play some impressive Overwatch heading into the play-ins. In fact, they were considered a favorite to make the playoffs in their hometown. But as we know, that was just too good to be true. Expectations and the Defiant have never had a good relationship ever. They were one fight off of beating Boston, but they choked and then proceeded to bomb out against London because, as it turns out, the rush comp with a Lucio tends to be better than the one that has an Ilyari that couldn't hit the Bass Pro Shop pyramid with their ultimate. By not making playoffs, they've stolen an electric crowd away from the last playoffs in OWL as we know it and solidified themselves as the most mid franchise in any competition maybe ever.
Not bad. Not bad at all.
Of all the teams to not make the playoffs, the Titans deserve the most respect. They had very little resources, a 5-man roster, and what many people consider to be a hangout spot for the Boston outcast. And yet, they managed to score a top 5 record in the West this year. It all surprisingly fell very nicely into place. They played very well as a team, and they found ways to outwork their opponents. In particular, you gotta love what we saw from Faith. He showed massive improvement at the main support position, and was honestly one of the best players there. Then you have Punk, who finally had the vindication of being a full-time starter. And then there's our guy Sugar Free. After 5 years of waiting of Mr. Lenny to come of age, he did not disappoint. Probably the rookie of the year, I'd say. The dream of watching this young prodigy on Atlanta Academy dominating in the big leagues finally came true. And even when faced with adversity and catastrophic levels of drama, the Titans kept their head down and continued to work. They even picked up Heesang to make the story even more special. It's amazing what the Titans accomplished. They got damn close to making the playoffs, and that's something we haven't said for a long time. And despite coming up short, this was still their best year since 2019. It took more than half of their lifetime to make their way back up. Everything finally fell into place. They finally put behind a very dark time in their existence. That's perhaps the biggest W of all. For the first time in a long time, Vancouver are not the butt of a joke.
Nice.
This season went how you hoped it would, but perhaps in the strangest way possible. London had so much momentum from a deep playoff run. There was room to be respectable for many years to come, but instead, at least at the beginning, London threw away what made them special. The only logical thing to do when things are working for you is making needless changes and substitutions and playing things the team is completely uncomfortable on. Surely things won't go terribly wrong, right? Well, how about a 2-8 start to your year? London, with only 6 games left in the season, were pretty much dead in the water. And suddenly, that's when the miracle happened. That's when the amnesia finally wore off. Win or loss, it was time to reawaken that Band of Brothers attitude by playing the one thing they can always rely on. Rhyme. No matter the end result, they knew this was going to be their best chance of winning, and they stuck with it. Their reward? How about winning 9 of your last 11 to get back to the playoffs? Through their own unique playstyle and undying trust in one another, London has pulled off perhaps the greatest season turnaround of all time. Now they head back to the playoffs while extremely hot as a dark horse team that is practically impossible to prepare for. They have a winning formula, and they genuinely might be one of the scariest teams here. If I was in the Spitfires bracket, I'd be terrified. Can't say anybody's surprised to see you here. The reigning champs, most of your core still intact? Makes sense. People were understandably a little worried about you after losing 3 very important players, and at certain moments those concerns were quite valid. I mean, when you look at the big picture, they didn't exactly do well against the top guys in the East. But what matters the most is they did enough to get by. They embraced the carry potential of Hanbin and got a needed boost from their new rookie Bliss. There's been a lot of challenges for the Dallas Fuel this year, but they managed to not be the first reigning champ to miss the playoffs. Congrats! Can you do anything now though? Even with a potential Zarya meta looming, Dallas still have a lot to prove. It seems like the scriptwriters are on your side here, but don't even think for a second that anything is guaranteed. With what some of your players have shown this year, you've got to step up big time. But hey, one step at a time, am I right? Congrats on 3 years straight of making the playoffs. You've come a long way. Good stuff.
Nice.
Ah yes, Just how you drew it up. Well, not exactly. They made playoffs, but definitely were not as dominant as you'd hope from a Chinese super team. There were a couple of moments where their abilities were heavily questioned, be it through the backline, Guxue's flexibility, or quite frankly looking bored during the regular season. But in typical Spark fashion, they got it done when it mattered the most. When it came to clutching up, the Spark were second to none. And now that they made it to the big dance, it doesn't matter what's being played or what their odds are. This is when the Spark magic usually happens. This is what they've been waiting for. If that DPS line and Guxue can do what they always have in these scenarios, there's no reason the Spark could not surprise us. Regardless of where things go from here, they lived up to their potential and now have a chance to flourish. Guxue and the boys, one last ride. Time to show the world what China is really made of.
Success!
I admit it. I wasn't ready for this. Seoul practically cruised through the regular season. They were dominant. 11 wins and 2 losses. The first seed representing the East in the playoffs, even though it should be the Spark. This is the most successful season the franchise has seen in years. Everything is clicking. They were dominant, they were flexible, and the roster was super productive. You'd expect as much from the DPS, but lots of other guys were contributing as well. Mag, finally gone from Washington jail, became one of the most reliable tanks in the game. Then there's Skewed, who ends up dominating just as advertised, finally leaving behind the shadow of Shu. And then there's Fixa. He felt like a totally different guy. The improvement was drastic, and all belief in him during the offseason was completely warranted. It's a shame they lost him to injury, huh? Regardless, Infernal were a top 2 team in their region. Making the playoffs is obviously deserved. My only gripe is, they usually choke when there's pressure. That's what concerns me heading into these playoffs. They constantly flopped on land this year, and their success is heavily dependent on MN3 and if he can get hot. It's been a good year overall, but they have a lot of work to do if they don't want to be seen as frauds. And more importantly, break that Philly curse.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
So you managed to pull it off after all. The Boston Uprising played as advertised. That's something you don't hear often. They managed to not waste one of the most talented rosters in league history. I admit it, I was pretty worried about you guys at first. The coaching, the scrim drama, a lot of us were believing you'd be a flop. Congrats on beating those fraud allegations, I guess. Overall though, solid year. You're a clear-cut top team in the league with superstars and champions across the board. Boston, on paper, more than has what it takes to win this entire thing. They've been there all year. They just can't seem to beat the top teams. That is what is holding them back. They just lack that closer in them. That is why they're not being taken as seriously as they definitely should be. Well, that, and their tendency to play down to their competition. A team of this stature is extremely capable of going on a big run. They just have to make that final push and get by that final barrier. And what better place to do so than the playoffs? Pretty much your entire roster has done this before, under these exact circumstances. Just one big win could be all it takes to set these guys loose. And if they deliver, the rest of the league may not know what's coming. Get it done, boys.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Can we really say we're surprised? Your success was basically guaranteed. Fearless and Pelican with perhaps the most dangerous backline ever assembled. It's no wonder they dominated through the league and are a top title contender. In fact, they got even more than what they bargained for. How about Happy, taking his game up to an even higher level than before? Man put up the best season of his career, and it came with him mostly not playing his specialty picks. The team needed him to be good on dive, and that's something he's never been known for. But the confidence from the coaching had him showing mastery on both Sombra and Tracer. We've grown accustomed to Happy being a weak point on teams, but this year was most definitely not the case. If anything, he might have been a top 2, top 3 most important player on the roster. And as a result of his improvement, Houston don't have many visible weaknesses and are in a great place to make a title run. There is not a single team you cannot compete with. In fact, you've shown you can be dominant. All your accomplishments this year is proof of it. It's been a fantastic season, and at this point, the only thing stopping you from the title is yourself.
Victory.
Florida Mayhem on top. That's different. Seemed like you'd be one of the better teams this year for sure, but damn. Tied for the most wins in the league is pretty nutty. The Mayhem have demonstrated strength after strength all season. The improvement from last year's players, along with the boost of Merit and Chorong, has the Mayhem sitting pretty as one of the league's title contenders. The Mayhem through this year have demonstrated top talent at all of their positions, including an MVP level year by someone, arguably the best tank in the game. Florida can beat you down through so many ways. For one, they're the most flexible team. They're better at adjusting to new compositions than 90+% of their competition. Every member of that team has a diverse hero pool that makes them ready for practically any situation. It's given them a massive leg up over the other teams and has been a big-time strength and part of their identity. And if that wasn't enough, there's a big-time clutch gene present with these guys. They've won some huge games against some very good teams. There is not a single team in the league they have not beaten. They are red hot. Florida haven't lost a game since June. Everything is going according to plan. It's their best season in franchise history by a country mile, and nobody would be surprised if they take this all the way.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Let's see, shall we? Arguably the best team in the league, the 1 seed in the playoffs, mid-season Madness champs, multiple MVP players. Yeah, checks out. The Reign were nothing short of magnificent in the regular season. Starting your season 13-0 typically does that, and Lip defining the meta with his MVP level Sombra also does that. This was a historic level of gapping everybody in the league. It's no wonder nobody stood a chance, and that's on top of quite possibly the most dominant backline of all time. Atlanta has this figured out to a science. The superstar playmakers at DPS, with arguably the league's best backline, will always give you a chance. It's just a question of whether or not it's enough. Since the meta stepped away from their comfort, they've been noticeably more vulnerable. Other contenders have started to catch up, and they just don't have that same chokehold. It leaves a lot of questions. Did they peak too early? Will their tanks get the job done? The Reign are in a very delicate situation. They're more than good enough to take this to the house, but one can't help but wonder if they're flexible enough. It's obvious they can do this, but the pressure is on. With this kind of team, with the effort and resources put into it, only first place is acceptable. Don't screw this up. So, the stage is now set. 8 teams moving to Toronto to play for quite possibly the last ever championship. It's been a very quick year, and parts of this season have been bad. Hopefully the playoffs can change that. It might be more open than we've ever seen before. There's a lot of teams with a reasonable shot at taking the crown. But then again, usually when the hype is the greatest is when we end up being let down. These playoffs are gonna suck, aren't they? Thanks for watching.